I feel once you connect with an actor to make them feel comfortable and understand the visions you have, that's the key thing. I mean,
this episode is brought to you by the best-selling book, Rise of the Film Entrepreneur, How to Turn Your Independent Film into a Money-Making Business. Learn more at filmbizbook.com. I'd like to welcome to the show, Marc Forster. How you doing, Marc?
I'm good. Thank you. And you, Alex?
I'm very good, my friend. So my first question, we're going to jump right into it, is how did you get started in the business?
I grew up in Switzerland in the mountains in Davos and, surrounded by just nature and not much. My parents didn't have a TV, and I always had to play outside to entertain myself versus being entertained. And that's sort of inspired me to become a storyteller. And the first time I saw a movie in a theater, I said, that's what I want to do.
Now, how did you get involved with Monsters Ball? Because that was such an impactful and crazy movie.
I made a movie called Everything Put Together, and that premiered at Sundance. And the writers saw that movie, and at the time, producers saw it. They all saw it, and they said I would be right for it. And they were trying to get the movie made for like 8 years. And the first I couldn't get it made. And it was, originally Sean Penn directing with Robert De Niro, Sean Penn, and Marlon Brando. And it was too expensive. And the first thing they asked me, look, we've been waiting to get this financed for all this time. We would make the movie with you, but can you make it for $3 million? And I made the Sundance movie for $50,000. I said, $3 million, I can do that. So that's how it was started.
So when you were directing Halle and Billy Bob in that film, did you see what was going on with Haley's performance at that point? Because she was amazing.
I didn't predict that she would win an Oscar at the time of shooting, but I definitely saw it when I saw her performances. She was extremely powerful, extremely raw and vulnerable, and that's what we discussed, and we wanted to go for, and that it felt real. And because Halle, is such a glamorous and beautiful human to really make it believable in the part, I felt she worked extra hard on it.
What advice do you have for directors who want to pull those kind of raw and those kind of emotions out of an actor? What did you do to make her feel comfortable enough to be that vulnerable on screen?
Ultimately, you discuss the part in depth, in your vision in depth, and you communicate your vision. And I feel once you connect with an actor to make them feel comfortable and understand the visions you have, that's the key thing. I mean, for the most vulnerable scene, the intimate scene between Billy Bob and her, there was a closed set, of course, and closed everything, that they felt totally protected and safe.
Now, you made the jump from indie to slightly larger budgets, just slightly, from Monsters Ball to James Bond. How did you handle psychologically the jump from 50,000 to 3 million to a couple $100 million?
I mean, there were a couple of movies between.
Sure. Yes, there was.
So I had I think Finance Day, 4 or 5 movies in between. So and the budget increasingly went bigger. And the one, the Kite Runner was the one before the Bond movie, but still it was only the $25 million range. And it's same saying, if you have your small sort of boutique shop or boutique, custom made shoe store, and then suddenly you become CEO of Macy's or something. and it's a different thing. You suddenly have so many more people, so many more questions. You shoot in seven countries all over the world, with $200 million budget and history of a franchise that's one of the most successful franchise in history. And you suddenly when you start reflecting on it, thinking, I hope I'm not gonna, this is not going to, that ship is not going to sink, because otherwise my career is over.
Right, exactly. So what does that feel like, being on the set for the first day of shooting Quantum of Solace, and you're just sitting there okay, there's a million people running around trying to get this thing going. How did that feel, being on the set on a Bond film? It's such a legendary franchise.
To begin with, we started on purpose the movie very intimate, with not some of the big action sequence and big sets, so that it felt very familiar to me. I knew the territory. I knew how to do those scenes, and from that we started growing. But what feels like before, you're always under the radar. Nobody really cares. And then suddenly you're doing a Bond movie, and suddenly you have the world press attention on you. And that is actually the biggest pressure. And that I didn't, so you don't think about that suddenly everyone will write about you. And before that, nobody really cared.
How did you deal with that psychologically, and how did that affect, if it affected at all, your creativity or your process?
I mean, the process of the movie was a tricky one because there was a writer's strike going on at that time in 2008. So we had a sort of unfinished script, and then the strike was from October to February. So it was very tricky. It was often just Daniel Craig and me in the trailer trying to figure out what we're going to do next. So that was the even more pressure. I think if we would have had a completed script that everybody said, this is fantastic, let's just go and shoot it, it definitely deflates some of the pressure. But if you have something that's not completed and you are suddenly stuck in that position and you have a release date in place, only 5 weeks to cut the movie, it's kind of intense.
Now, obviously you also worked on World War Z, which is another small independent budget. How did you deal with the stress of heading up such big productions? I mean, as a director, it's just so many people and so many departments, and you're still trying to be creative and still be intimate with your actors. How do you handle that stress?
I'm like, it's interesting. I had like World War Z. It's for the Israel sequence when the zombies climb over the wall.
Yeah.
And remember that sequence?
Of course.
So when I drove in the morning, I had a driver drive me to set in Malta. We shot that in Malta. And we came to set and we pulled up, and he looked at 2,000 extras and helicopters in the air and buses and everything else going on. And my driver literally had an anxiety attack just looking at it. And then,
not helpful.
No, and it's like, what? Oh, wow, what are you doing today? And you just go out and you just have to focus, and you have to blend out all the chatter. Yeah, and I think that's one of the key things for a director in general. You have so many voices always in general, from the financiers, studio, actors, producers, whatever, that you really stick to your vision. When you hear the chatter, you take some stuff you like, but ultimately you have to stick to your vision. And I think it's part of the art in that, to be able to stay calm and blend it out.
Now, as directors, there's always that day that you feel like the entire world's coming crashing down around you. I'm assuming you have that every day, but there's more than there's that one day on any production that you don't know how you're going to get through it. So what was that day on any of your productions, and how did you overcome it?
I think, I would say when we're shooting Western China, the Kite Runner, our line producer forgot to, it was before digital, it was still, we're shooting on film, and our line producer forgot to order film. So we only had short ends left. Short ends.
Sure.
So basically we're shooting these scenes, and there was a 6-minute dialogue scene, but only have like 2 minutes of film. So I couldn't tell the actor, we're gonna piecemeal this, and just doing it in pieces. So the actors are playing 6 minutes of roles and acting their heart out, but there are only 2 minutes of film in it. So at the end, I knew there was no film in it. And then I basically, next time I just shoot the middle and then the end. But sometimes the actors didn't understand, why do you do so many takes? And they said, but we got it then, it was so great. But they weren't aware. And that was super stressful. It's thinking you have these great performances, but you don't have them on film. And just telling them, we don't have any film in the camera right now, which is like out, wasn't the right thing to do.
Now, on your new film, A Man Called Otto, which, by the way, I saw and I absolutely loved. There's such a beautiful film, and this newcomer, Tom Hanks, is fantastic, by the way.
Real discovery.
A real discovery, without question. How did you get involved with this project? And also, like, it seems like you're going back to your roots a little bit. It's a very intimate film, very small in scope comparatively to the other big things you've done over your career.
Yeah, I read the book and I was so touched and moved, and I laughed and I cried, and then I saw there was a Swedish version of the film, which I saw was good too. And then I thought, this movie, we have to make an American version out of this, because it's so, it's so funny, but it's also so touching and dark, and it's like both. But ultimately, it's a life-affirming film, and what I loved about it, it brings the neighborhood back together. And I think we are also divided these days, and I think that still at the end, this is, I always feel like it's one country. we all need to work together. And even though we have different point of views, and there's so many different characters on that street, which is so sweet. And I like the new neighbor, the Mexican family that moves in across the street, who she comes over and tries to do some with food. And I think food is one of those great things that we can literally all share, which definitely warms someone's heart. But she's so persistent, that neighbor, that her name is Mariana Trevino. She plays Marisol. That Otto's character, who Tom Hanks plays, just that ultimately can't, like, he just opens up. He can't take it anymore.
Do you still get nervous when you're directing people like Tom Hanks? Like when on that first day on set, you're like, Tom Hanks is here.
I mean, look, I love that man. I think he's one of the greatest stars ever. He's definitely, greatest talent I've ever worked with. I mean, it's so extraordinary. After 40 years, he still loves what he does and is a big movie star. And he comes in the morning and he sits on set and he never leaves. He's like in like a meditation. And, usually stars of that caliber, you do the take, they're out to a trailer. He stays there all day long as a crew. He just sits there as a crew. And then you relight, change lights, he doesn't leave. And it's just this concentration and this sort of just being there. It's pretty special.
How do you approach different acting styles in your directing? Because a Tom Hanks is probably different than a Halle Berry, that's different than a Brad Pitt. Like, how do you adjust multiple characters in the same scene?
Yeah, it's basically you have to like find a way to get to connect and see what the actor needs or not, and how open they are and how willing, how willing they are to collaborate. And I was pretty lucky throughout my career that I always worked with actors who were very open, and I never had like, the sort of the nightmare situation, and that they were very focused and prepared and on time. So I never dealt with the divas of the show business, which I'm very, very blessed. But at the same time, you just see what they need and really try to feel them out, because sometimes it's better to say nothing than too much. So because sometimes the actor needs their space and they find it, and you as a director maybe just have to say, maybe we can just try a different prop, or try this or that. It's less than giving them a direction. It's less trying something a different direction. So that's how it really, from person to person, it differs.
And how did you balance the darkness of this story with the humor? Because you did it so masterfully. Because you definitely touch upon very, very dark themes in this movie, but yet you're laughing and crying and dealing with those themes. It's a very fine balancing act you did.
Yeah, it's a lot of it is in editing, because we obviously shot a little bit more here and there, but it's just finding this balance also between the flashbacks and present day. That you not stay too much in the flashbacks, to come back, that the emotions stay connected with Tom and in the present day, and also in the flashbacks, ultimately that just give enough information that creates sort of a mystery and enough for you to wanting to keep watching. And it's juxtaposing sometimes the dark with the humor, straightly direct. When, for instance, the hinge breaks and he's on the floor and he lands right next to the paper with the yes, 2 for $8, and then he says that. I mean, that takes you right back into the humor.
Right, it's just so funny. Like what is like he's just did that, and he's like, nope, it's a good deal. I got to keep this.
Exactly.
So beautiful. Now I'm going to ask you a few questions. I ask all my guests, Marc. What advice would you give a filmmaker trying to break into the business today?
I mean, ultimately, I think that, today, you can make a film on your phone, basically. What it really comes down to is a great story. And I think also when you find a story, the more personal connection you have with that, the better. It's either, if you don't have the funds, I would recommend to do a short and then have the feature script ready. So you shoot the short and then say, look, this is my short and this is what the feature is going to be. And that's how to raise money and figure it out and get actors and people that would love the short. Let's take our bet on this guy. Or to make a feature for if you can raise the money, but no matter what, it all comes down to the script, that the script is really strong and be free. I think it's important to give it to other people to read the script, to have them have a look, get feedback and just keep working on that. But I think the stronger the script is, the better. And then the other thing is, once you make a movie and you have a movie that works, let's say at Sundance or any of the festivals, and someone buys it, that you have a second script ready. Because you don't want to too much time say, oh, I have nothing now, I have to write another script or find something for the next year or two to get that going. But at that time, we're living in such a fast society that might have been too late. So I think to have a second project ready is important as well.
Now, what is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film industry or in life?
I think, patience is definitely something. You always have to learn, like even sitting in traffic and staying calm. It's like, and patience with people, with your kids, with everything. It's like just to be patient. I think it's a hard one.
What did you learn from one of your greatest failures?
Yeah, they always say Silicon Valley is built on failures. I think failures are truly key for an artist, for anyone, because you learn from them. For instance, after Finding Neverland, I made a film called Stay. That wasn't Ryan Gosling, Naomi Watts, great cast, great Ewan McGregor, great cast, good acting. And the critics didn't love it, the audience didn't love it. It has found a little bit of a following throughout the years. But when I made that movie, I think, why didn't that movie work? And then out of that movie came Stranger Fiction, which also is sort of absurd and comedic, but that movie worked. And I was able to make that sort of absurdness in that movie emotional. And I wasn't able to do that in Stay, even though visually it's cool and compelling, but it ultimately didn't connect with people emotionally. And Stranger Fiction did. So
then, and the hardest question of all, 3 of your favorite films of all time.
3 of my favorite films. I mean, it's a tricky one. I love a lot of the dead directors. I love Ingmar Bergman, Swedish director. I would say like Wild Strawberries of his. Yeah. I really, really enjoy. There's 3. That's a tough one.
3 today. I know it changes tomorrow, so it won't be on your tombstone. Don't worry.
No, I like. I always loved the Marx Brothers Duck Soup.
Oh, it's so good. It still holds. It still holds today.
Yes. And I think Howard Hawks, Bringing Up Baby, it's one of my favorites too. Because I just love how fast that dialogue goes and how she performs that. That's also one of my favorite films.
And where can people watch A Man Called Otto?
Hopefully they all will watch it in the theaters, because it's a movie that really you should experience in a theater. And it's one of those movies, people seem to come out for it. And it's something you want to experience together. You laugh and you cry, and you don't want that alone at home in front of the TV. So right now it's still in the theaters for the next couple of weeks. So please go and support it.
And very last question. I'd love to hear your opinion on this. As a filmmaker, we grew up loving movies at the theater, but that seems to be becoming more and more of an endangered species unless there's certain kind of films. What are your hopes for the future, my friend? Because it's tougher and tougher to get people at the theater nowadays.
A Man Called Otto was the kind of movie Hollywood used to make.
Yeah.
And they don't make them very much anymore. And I ran into a few people now and said, they said, we have hope again, because A Man Called Otto, it seems like people came out to see it, and we didn't think those kind of movies would still play in the theater. And I'm so glad they came and supported the movie. And I hope, that people will keep coming out for movies like that, because that will keep those movies alive, because the financiers, obviously in the studios, will not pay for a movie when no one shows up. And they very quickly have their algorithms. There so many people the decisions today are not being made anymore by the gut, by like the old studio heads or people. It's mainly made by algorithms and marketing. So can I market that movie? What's the algorithm on it? Can we sell it? And they run these numbers, and that's how it gets done mostly.
Marc, it's a pleasure talking to you, my friend. Please keep up the good fight, my friend, and keep making the films you're making. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Alex. Have a good day. Take care.